Architecture Mobile manifesto dates from a very long time. I was writing it down in '57, but the idea was working a long time ago. And when I was in '56 at the Siam, then in Dubrovnik, there I realized that it brings something new for architects. Because, you know, when I was in Israel, I thought it's a common idea which is quite known in everywhere. And, you know, for me, the reaction of younger people in Dubrovnik was important. And idea is essentially very simple. At the center of anything built, it is the inhabitant who is the central person and not the architect. The architect has to provide satisfaction to the inhabitant. But this included a second question. Does the inhabitant know what he wants? And I found he doesn't know in praxis. So there was a solution for these problems. This is apply trial and error process. Trial and error, every inhabitant does with his furniture. You know, he moves a chair and puts it in the place where it is required. So I had to find techniques by which architecture is adapted to trial and error. That means the inhabitant can change the places of the windows and the situation of walls and reorganize the volumes. That means everything, every physical element of architecture should be movable like furniture. The idea was simple. In the same time, mainstream architects didn't always like it. Le Corbusier told me, it's not my line, but you have to do it. And that's true. Architecture was always educated to produce something for eternity. Great architecture is eternal. And I found that it's past. I developed now even further. I will talk about this later. And I can introduce into architecture improvisation. And I was doing in the last years, I had many occasions to produce it. The initial solution was to create an empty skeleton, a grid, which is supported with minimum columns. That means columns at very large distance. So leave the minimum impact at ground level. Secondly, into this grid, you shouldn't fill out all the space, because then it leaves no mobility. Like you do in furniture. I am in a chair, but I am using more space than the chair itself, and that's true for architecture. So mobile architecture, I was hesitating long time to call it mobile, but I found it was the best expression internationally. So I was calling it mobile architecture. This permitted to transform it into meuble, all the elements of the architecture. For this idea was essentially social, not technical. The technical part was only the answer to the social disposition. And for example, can you mix residential with professional or public space? Where to have the public space? Where to organize a residential space? So in the initial phase, I was organizing residential space into the grid and public space, and every function that involves heavy loads left at the ground level. So at the ground level, one could leave what was there or add new things. It's free. So it was, I was trying to tell it that way, two spaces with a different scale grid. The residential had, in the earlier proposals, a 6 to 7 meters grid, and at the ground level, a 60 to 80 meters grid is different. So this was really architecture without building. I will try to explain it. The fact today there exists internet and a global phone network. For example, for a university, you don't need classrooms. You can have all the teaching through internet. It happens, it started a long time ago. The Open University in England did it. You don't need buildings. What you need, they are decent dwellings for the students, that the students should work at home, and some laboratories or working room which has to be collective. For example, with museums. Museums don't need building. They need exhibits. And exhibits you can exhibit in an open space, in a skeleton. This was the model for the Warsaw Museum. But in the meantime, we had a buildingless museum. That means I am calling them iconostas, a skeleton. We had in Como, we had it in Middelburg in Holland, we had in Antwerpen. So and now they are doing it in Berlin. It is easy to do. And now we can really imagine architecture with do-it-yourself techniques. It's possible. And that's a change. But do-it-yourself, this means that spare parts are existing. You cannot do yourself a computer because you can't have spare parts. You could do, for example, an old-fashioned car, you can build up by spare parts. So what I think that all this is changing. Architecture is not independent from reality, extra-architectural reality. The architect has no role. That's not true. The architect is a specialist. I'm trying to tell that way. He stays an artist of space. The space is a material what you can handle as artist. You can advise. That's a problem. I originally thought that spaces, the volumes of air are very small in the vie spatiale, that you can have a collective climatization. Now I am thinking other way, improvisation. You improvise solar heating, you improvise whatever techniques. So, in a way, this reminds Los Angeles. I am very much against Los Angeles, the idea of the scattered town. But I find there is one thing what is right in Los Angeles, that small inhabitants can decide their precinct. For example, for climatization and so on. Energy saving comes from the buildinglessness. If an office worker doesn't have to commute 2 hours to go his job and back, so that's an energy saving. I was as well proposing, this had some answer, but the question stays political. You know, I was I'm speaking now about for the city, a simple problem. I had a cleaning lady who was living in the Paris suburb. She came 1.5 hours to Paris every morning, 1.5 hour going back. Yes, 1.5 hours. This is Brussels from Paris. 2 hours, that's London. So I was thinking that the city changes, and I was proposing something I was calling Metropole Europe. Metropole Europe has a metro, it's the TGV. The metro stops are Paris, Brussels, I don't know, Liège, Cologne, or Paris, London, and so on. You can, in this network, you have a large zone where the distance between 2 towns is about 2 hours or less than 2 hours. And you don't need extending towns. You use the existing towns with a subway, 250 kilometers an hour. There is the problem, it's the price, the fares. Okay, the fares, the Paris metro is subsidized everywhere, the subway is subsidized. The train fares can be subsidized and give abonnements like the carte orange in Paris. I don't know, the carte orange is about, I think, 80 euros a month. So you could at the Metropole Europe have 120 for 4 trips 6 trips a week. And then you have the largest city of the world, 250 million inhabitants. It includes agricultural regions. It's not over-urbanized. It works from central city to central city, and then you take over locally the city network. This is again nothing new. It is an everyday fact. People do it. But to consider that all the continent as one city, to rethink the role of every space in function of that. You know, there are now many people who work in Brussels and go 3 times a week from Paris or in Lyon or in Strasbourg. And it is a fact, but this reduces the importance of extending cities. The idea with the mobile architecture, what I wanted to tell is, it is going very long, very far away, simply by looking at the social and technological context and try to imagine an architect dependent on this. Are not separate, it's all this related. The problem is one complex and not many isolated questions. And what I am trying to leave at one complex, and the questions and the answers are not isolated, they fit in. So that's what I can tell you. Look on architecture. The same thing, and you know, it's as a child I liked architecture, and I was imagining it to do nice drawings. But then I found out it's not the drawings who are important. The reality is something different. And when I was getting to Israel, again, I arrived into reality, arrived in a country where I could continue my studies, but I was working 2 days a week as a building worker for my existence. And I learned quite a lot. I learned how lives a building worker, and I realized that it is important that architecture is not isolated. You know, then later when teaching, I found very often it was very nice. Students made a proposal. It was the period when prefabrication was fashionable. So they made on the paper prefabrication systems. And I was asking, yes, you are doing it. Where does the worker put his hands? You know, it is important that something that's very easy on the drawing is not easy in the reality, and vice versa. Doing, for example, structures which are undrawable But in the reality, they are very easy to do. So it's a completely different way. 20 years, 30 years ago, I was walking in Vancouver, and suddenly I see a building, absolutely classical ville spatiale. And I was very glad about, I don't think the way, like generally well-known architects think about plagiat, this one is copying me, that one is copying me. No, it's wonderful if you are copied, so that means you had the impact. It's exactly the opposite. I am encouraging. This is in a way what I can tell, mobile architecture was really an idea which came through, developed through personal experience. And that means the first, that architecture is not adapted to the way as I am living. Then architecture doesn't leave space for survival, autonomy, and it is important. And then finally, urban scale, it is not adapted to everyday living, and you have to find other ways. So this was the least impact on the ground level, but then as well the Metropole Europe project. This is what I was calling architecture without building. The new technology makes a certain kind of building not necessary. We don't need enormous assembly halls. Everywhere the revolutions go on into big places, in Tahrir or on Puerta del Sol. The building is not necessary. What I was telling you about museums, you don't need protection. I'm telling people have an umbrella when they are looking at it. We overbuild. I think the 20th century overbuild the world. We have too many buildings and not enough for the real needs. We have too many superfluous buildings. And that's where new technology comes in. I will try to explain in simple terms. A city was always based on proximity. The old city had to fit into the city walls. It was a certain proximity. Then the later cities had to fit into the networks, water supply, sewage, and so on. But already the water supply with the Romans, it started to be different, proximity changed. And then it was the social proximity, meeting people. The old system was that you had a forum, an agora where people meet. When I was a student, still I learned marketplaces is for people to meet. I never saw in a supermarket two people to talk. They go in and go out. The system changed. People meet by the pocket phone. Hi, I am here. I will see you the next corner. There is a cafe. How it's called? Okay. So that's what happened. The proximity for meeting people is not anymore necessary. The proximity is in your pocket. If you are looking at people in the street, they are talking at their pocket phone. In the metro, they are talking in the pocket phone. So suddenly you meet an enormous amount of people. But the pocket phone doesn't replace face-to-face meeting, but it makes very easy to have appointments. And that's what's happening. So there are the big forums in every new town, and they are empty. Nobody goes there because it's easier to phone and I meet at the cafe next corner. Everything, the social function, the social attitude changed. And we have to understand that you don't need to build as it was even 50 years ago. You know, it was very fast. I think that's not a problem for the architect of the planet. That's other field of technology, which is in reality existing. When I was talking about Los Angeles, you have it. A large part of Los Angeles building not linked to the sewage system, but have their personal sewage. So that's, and this is many places. There is the question of the water. You know, the water network is vulnerable. The terrorists were blowing up the Twin Towers in New York. This was terrible. But if they would blow up the water system in New York, the city would get empty in a week. You know, this is why I was speaking about the proximity. The proximity, as we knew it, that means the large networks was vulnerable. Rome was taken by simply they blew up, they demolished the aqueducts. So this is the analogy. People need for survival a large scale of autonomy. When I was speaking about vegetable gardens, it's autonomy. When I was speaking that you don't need to go to an office building but work at home, it's autonomy. If I don't know, I gave a talk to Tbilisi in Georgia, sitting here, exactly that way, and by internet it got through. There is a necessity of autonomy. In the same time, for the linkages, we have immaterial technology. This is what I was telling about the internet. I don't know whether I'm right. That's the way as I see it. And I see it not only in these fields, I see it as well in economy. I think that a certain economic autonomy is necessary. It is really the period when one has the right to do. This doesn't mean that to dismantle the network This means simply to be less dependent on it. I am not telling to demolish cities. I am not telling that you shouldn't keep the proximity you have, but you are not any more dependent on it.